everyone. Welcome to session 2 of Digital Arts. And what we're going to look at today is how we can start to break down the complexity of good shots and good compositions and good kind of design for film and reduce it down into a way that's digestible and a way that we can understand why certain decisions have been made. So there's a couple of ways we're going to do it. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to show you a couple of stills from a selection of films, and then I'm going to do a process where I break them down into their core components and just look at how these components work together really nicely. So that's the first bit. We're just going to do a quick kind of breakdown exercise to get our eyes trained, and that's what session 2 and the next week and a half's activities are really about. It's about training your eye and developing that ability to first off understand why something works and why it looks good, and then begin to apply the same principles into your own design work. So we'll get started. Let's have a look at some of the content that's we're going to test this week and kind of apply our eye to. So I tried to give it a bit of variation. So I've got a couple that's from a single animated film and another set which are from 2 different live action films but the same director. So we'll take a look at those now. Okay, so the first piece of work we're going to look at is a still from The Willoughbys. So this is a brand new feature film that's just been released through Netflix. It's directed by a very, very talented director who in a previous life was a storyboard artist, a guy called Chris Pern. So the first thing I wanted to showcase in this is that this shot, it's got a very, very clear focal area. So I've sketched that in straight away. It's so obvious where you are supposed to be looking. And there's loads of clues kind of dotted throughout it that will kind of lead you in that direction. So everything from the shadows of the 2 chairs, through to the huge tusks that are next to the mantelpiece, through to the framing of the mantle itself. These are all components that really focus our eye to a specific area. But what's interesting is that focal area is actually out of focus. So we're guided to look to a central point in the shot, which is almost dead center of the composition, but slightly lower down. But actually, that's not what we're focused on at that point in time, because that center area is out of focus. So what we're instead supposed to be looking at is the leaflet, this little brochure that the Willoughby children have made to trick their parents into leaving. And that's kind of lowering down through the top of the shot, and that's in focus. So it's using very, very shallow depth of field in the shot to draw our eye to a specific position. And I think that's really clever, because it's saying this is the center of the shot, the actual focal area is where the shot's going to end. But that's not where it is right now. And that's a really, really good technique to use when we're designing something, is think about the journey of the eye through the shot. Where do you want people to move to? Where do you want them to start the journey at the beginning of your shot, and where do you want them to end the journey? And what kind of movement happens for them as they move through that space? So I think that's a really, really nice example of strong compositional design, where actually the shot is not static. It is designed to have the audience eye start in one place and end in another place. And it's not just using all the perspective lines and the construction of the environment to guide your eye, but it's also using the depth of field of the camera lens, which I think is a very, very nice technique as well. So this shot is slightly different. This is the scene in which we're introduced to the baby, the little orphan, and it's done through the perspective of it was done through the cat initially, because the cat's our narrator within the story, but also it's told in a way that kind of pulls on a lot of horror themes. And there's some really interesting stuff going on in this shot. So first off, I think it's fairly straightforward what where the horizon line is, and where the vanishing point is within the shot, and you've got some kind of fairly obvious information in there that will guide your eye. So the lines of the gate, the lines of the box as well. So the horizontal lines of the box. I think it's important to bear in mind that the perspective of the box looks slightly off, and that's because the box is not perfectly a perfect cube shape or a rectangular shape, it's slightly slanted. So I've just put those vertical red lines in there to highlight that's what's throwing your eye off with the perspective, is the actual shape of the box. But what's really important is actually all of those perspective lines, they guide the eye back to the focal area, which is actually the narrator, so the cat. That's where we're getting guidance from within this shot about how we should feel about what's happening. So it's not just about where to look, but it's also guiding the audience in how do you feel when you get there. And the other way that they've done that is this really clever use of light within this. So though it feels like there's one light source, so the street lamp in the background, because it's that very clear conical shape, the light is actually really, really intelligently designed. So there's lots of reflected light going on. So you've got a singular source, which is a nice starting point, again, for the viewer's eye to begin and to then move down to the bottom right to where the narrator is, where the cat is. But also what the shot does is it then places a different light, a completely separate light is shining down onto the box and highlighting the left side of it. So the background light, that light right in the far background, and then this foreground light actually have a really strong relationship with one another in that they both direct the eye towards the narrator and help us really think kind of carefully about how he is interacting with this box and with this kind of subject matter. And then when you think about that as the positive space, so where that light is hitting is the positive space, then you can look at where the negative space exists, and that's really cleverly done as well. So it's not just in one half of the shot, it's in pieces. So the back of the box is dropped into shadow, the garden gates are dropped into shadow. So these are the components that are not necessary because they don't actually add anything to the story. The story is being delivered by what's pinned between the two light sources, which is that narrator. So think about that when you're designing a shot. It's like, okay, if I want my audience to look at a specific character, as opposed to just thinking about where I put them, think about what other devices can I use within the shot? How can I use light to guide the audience to look a specific way and to see what I'm seeing? The other important element here that I'm just highlighting is that when we place the character's neckline or their head or their eye line or something in that region on the horizon line, we are saying that we sit at the same height as that character. So we're not looking down on the cat. We're not observing him as if we're a human and he's a cat. We've come down to his level and we're seeing the world as he sees the world. Which, what that does is it's telling the audience, feel a sense of empathy with this character. Feel what they feel. If they're scared, you be scared. If they're feeling adventurous and inquisitive, you be adventurous and inquisitive. So it's really good bit of design there, that horizon line almost perfectly lines up with the neck position of the narrator. So it really does put us in his shoes, so we'll react the way he reacts. And then the last thing to add is there's some really interesting stuff going on here with verticals as well. Vertical lines are being used really well to establish distance and establish space. And one of the last things I noticed was how well reflection is used, but we'll look at that in a later session. So that's from the Willoughbys. Okay, so this shot is from Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049. And it's a really interesting one because there's some stuff going on in here that's slightly unusual, but also stuff that's very, very familiar. So you should all be familiar with symmetrical composition. You know, Kubrick used it obsessively. Hitchcock used it. You know, it's a really common strategy to use to make your audience feel uncomfortable, is to add a sense of symmetry to the design. So you can see I'm just marking out a couple of lines here with kind of where my center line is and making some observations on where I think that the horizon line is likely to be, and also kind of a better idea of kind of where we are in relation to the characters. So we're kind of hovering up here slightly. So they're about to go down a flight of stairs, but we're not. We're kind of slightly higher than that, so that our eye line is fairly close to theirs. It's slightly lower, actually. I think our eye line is about level with the character K's chest, roughly. And then we've got some really kind of clear perspective lines, so it's fairly obvious at this point roughly where the vanishing point is in the shot. You know, so that's not where the intelligence of this is. We can look at this and instantly go, well, that's symmetrical. Everything's pushing towards the center character. but there is slightly more complex than that actually. So first off, it's not the relationship between the character and the set are not as straightforward as it might seem. So they're not. He's not dead center. So the empathy here is maybe not so much with him. He actually sits slightly asymmetrically, which I'll kind of go into in a second. But there are some really other very, very interesting pieces of design going on here. So first off, it's worth kind of looking at the heights. So there's some really interesting stuff going on with vertical values. So what do we mean by vertical values? Well, the higher up in a composition we place something, it can sometimes mean that that's the level of importance that object has, especially when we're looking at lots of humanoid characters or lots of solid objects and how high they are above the horizon line. So that can definitely kind of signify something. So for example, I've marked in roughly where I kind of assume the horizon line to be, and you can see Kay's head is slightly higher, but then the clones, these artificial life forms, they actually sit higher up in the composition, and I think that's really interesting. So it's almost saying to us like, yes, we've got important things kind of happening with this character moving through the shot, but actually what we want you to do, and what I want you to do as a director, is pay very specific attention to the stuff that's going on next to the shot. Don't just focus on this one thing, and then using things like the lower values, so the dark areas, the unlit areas of the shot, is also a great way to frame that importance. So we're saying, like, he is still important, our characters are still important, but we definitely want you to look around you, focus on the things that are the other objects here and the other characters, effectively, that are existing in this shot. So I think that's a really kind of intelligent piece of design that's going on there. We can also look at the relationship that exists with other components as well. So, like for example, that it's not just about that one area of darkness. You've got the entire top of the shot is secluded as well. So it's got these kind of lower light levels going on, which I think is very, very interesting. And it's a great way to help us understand that we are moving from the top to the bottom. So our eye should almost move downwards through the shot. We start in the lower lit areas because he stands out against that dark background. He's basically framed by that shot. And then our eye moves downwards. And as it moves downwards, we're kind of looking at all of these objects to the left and to the right of them. Yeah, so all of these synths. So we're looking down at focusing on them. And then our eyes are following the light almost. You can see I've kind of highlighted these well-lit areas and say, look, this is where we end. We start high up in this dark area, we move down and we see all these important objects to the left and the right, and then our kind of gaze ends towards the bottom area of the shot. The other thing that I think is kind of maybe worth noting at this point as well is that there are breaks kind of in the symmetry, and there are breaks in the lighting slightly, which I think is really cool. So, for example, breaks in the lighting is it's not just one piece of light at the bottom. So it's not like half the shot is dark and half the shot is light. It's more complex than that. So he's used careful lighting on the stairs, so that the walls either side of the stairs are just that slightly lower value. So it adds some interesting framing there. And then the other thing that's kind of going on, which I think is really cool, is when we look at the vertical lines and the balance of vertical lines within this shot, there are obviously clear pieces of symmetry. So the glass tanks, the stairs, the lighting either side as well, there's lots of symmetry. But the characters are asymmetrical. So Ryan Gosling's character in this does not sit symmetrically within the shot. He sits asymmetrically, and that makes him our piece of normality. Okay, symmetry doesn't occur very often in nature. It's not a natural occurrence. It's very much a synthetic occurrence. And I think that's what this shot is doing, is it's saying, look, all of this stuff is kind of creepy and unnatural, but however weird this character is, especially at the beginning, he's still the point at which we empathize. He should be the focal area for us, for our empathy and our support and our understanding. And we can showcase that just by placing him slightly asymmetrically within the shot. It's very subtle, but by continuing to do this through consecutive shots and concurrent sequences, it's a great way to establish who we are supposed to feel sorry for. Yeah, so we've got symmetry and asymmetry within the shot. Okay, and then the last one we're going to look at in this very, very kind of short lecture is a shot from the film Arrival. This is a really interesting one because this is a shot absent of characters. So it's kind of a very, very different focal area that we've got here. You know, we can't always rely on characters to be the point at which we feel lots of empathy. Sometimes we've got to use objects, and we've got to use placements of objects within environments to create a sense of empathy or to create a sense of understanding of the shot. So what I've done with this first thing, gone straight in and kind of worked out roughly where the horizon line is and where our eye level is. So it's just over halfway up, so it's not perfectly halfway. It's also kind of slightly distorted by the elevated terrain on the right hand side, so we've got a little bit of distance in the terrain, which I think is quite interesting. And then within this you can see that we've got fairly clear areas of high and low value within the shot. So we've got the lower value area is the land mass, which I'm just kind of marking off here, which kind of makes sense. You know, it's a land mass, it's going to be slightly darker against the water. And then we've also got these kind of shadowed areas here where the light's not hitting. And then the kind of logic of those shadows in the bottom of the composition actually come from the placement of clouds in the top of the composition. So we're saying, look, it's dark down here because there's very thick but scattered clouds above us. So it creates this really nice, quite dynamic breakup actually of light and dark areas. So that's quite nice in a shot. Like, you don't just want the top half or the bottom half or the left side or the right side being dark and light with clear divisions. Sometimes you need to scatter the dark and light in order to create something that's sort of visually quite interesting. So that's the first thing we can take from this shot to see that it's effective. But it's not the only thing. There are other kind of tools and techniques that are being utilized here to create something that looks very visually striking, and works even as a still image. It works aesthetically as a moving image. It's fantastically strong. So the thing that I'm looking at here is this idea of like the compositional balance between specifically specifically highlighted objects. So the first object obviously is the alien ship. It stands out very clearly from the background because it's obviously like black, like it's completely dark. It's got high contrast, very clear outlines on it, so it stands out. But actually, it's not alone. There are two other components here that balance really nicely against it, which are the lights. So the reflection of the sun on the water, the reflection of light across the water, actually can create two very striking components, which are a very nice counterweight to that very dark object. And it works. You know, we've got what's effectively like a triadic composition here. So high contrast areas that together kind of balance, and they balance because they're asymmetrical. You know, I think it wouldn't be, I know it sounds very strange, very petty almost, but this shot wouldn't be as effective if that second the lower light source, the slightly more mottled light source, if that reflection wasn't there, this shot wouldn't work as well. You kind of need the odd number, the three elements, as opposed to a perfectly balanced element in order to make this as effective as possible. But it's great, and it's really simple, but it is still very, very effective, and it's something we can kind of take on board with our shots, is how we're balancing things, how we balance things left to right, how we balance them vertically as well, and what that kind of means for the work that we're creating. Okay, so that's our warm-up exercise done. We've kind of started to break down some images to train our eye. So what I'd like you to do now is have a go at this. I want you to find just a couple of screenshots from random films. Pick stuff that you know is good. All right, don't pick anything that is maybe slightly contentious in terms of its critical value and how people hold it. Just pick a film, animated or live action, that you know is kind of commonly accepted to be a good piece of filmmaking. Because that's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to make bad stuff good. We're trying to look at the good things and understand why they are good. Why does this shot work? Why is it effective? Why do I care about the characters in this sequence? Why do I love the lighting in this sequence? And do that kind of breakdown. So that's your first task. Have a go at this. it's just a quick warm up one, and it's just to get your eye working. Because then what we're going to do is we're going to do some painting exercises, digitally or traditionally, entirely up to you, where we can start to play around with thinking about putting these very simplistic objects together. So before we get to the complexity, starting to paint in just simple thumbnails, simple designs that we can then take forward into really complex pieces of digital painting.